Hey everyone, welcome back to Assembly Guide. I'm thrilled you're back again. Today is a solo episode, but I'm talking about a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. And the theme of today's episode is your body is not company property. It's a big topic, one I really care about. I'm going to jump right in. Theatrical workers have very physical jobs and often very repetitive jobs. We perform and run the same shows, often 8 times a week, working 6 of the 7 days each week and dancing, singing, acting, or running the same show as a stage manager, executing the same material show after show. Many studies have been done on repetitive motion and its effect on the body, even to the point that repetitive strain injury, RSI, or repetitive stress injury is actually a technical term defined in many medical resources and articles. And before I continue a little bit, I just want to put a pause here and say, I'm not saying our jobs as actors and or stage managers are more physically demanding than every other industry. That's not at all something that I'm saying. So if you're experiencing any resistance, let's just zoom out and remind ourselves we don't want to be stuck in a place of scarcity mindset. A rising tide lifts all boats. We should want better working conditions for everyone. So I'm only addressing our industry in this podcast. There are many others that are also equally, if not more, physically demanding and have jobs that are physical and manual and repetitive in ways that also create harm and stress on people's bodies, just like ours does. So, many people don't think of theatrical workers, stage managers, and performers when they think of physical labor, but we do very repetitive physical jobs. As a dancer especially, I'm often tasked with doing physical movement exactly the same way to as similar of a degree as possible with each performance. And doing the same exact physical movement day after day, 6 days and 8 shows a week, sometimes 52 weeks a year, inevitably leads to repetitive strain and injury. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about injuries, about your rights as a worker, and about what employers should be doing to ensure that your body is safe and healthy and that you can do your work sustainably, especially when the demands of your job create the inevitable physical stress and strain that cause injury and break down your very human body. For a little context, I'm going to get really technical for a moment, but I'll be super brief. Employers are legally required to provide safe workplaces. They're legally required to provide workers' compensation coverage in almost all states, and to get super technical, I'm going to say except Texas from my research, which is the only state with no statewide requirement for private employers, which is not great. But the specific triggers for the requirement of workers' comp vary by state, often depending on the number of employees. Also, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also covers most private sector employers and their workers, as well as some public sector employers and workers. So all this to say, federal law entitles you to a safe workplace. That makes sense, right? In our workspaces, we should be safe. OSHA's website contains language and links to other federal resources about worker fatigue, about how excessive schedules can lead to poor health outcomes, and put people and workers at higher risk of injury and accident. OSHA also identifies these factors: performing the same or similar tasks repetitively, working in awkward postures or being in the same position for long periods of time, and using positions that place stress on the body, all as risk factors that can lead to ergonomic issues and injury. Basically, everything we do as actors and stage managers falls under these categories by the repetitive nature of our jobs and puts us at higher risk of injury. OSHA's website reads, early reporting, diagnosis, and intervention can limit injury severity, improve the effectiveness of treatment, minimize the likelihood of disability or permanent damage, and reduce workers' compensation claims. So I promise that's the end of all the technical talk. And when I read this, I got so excited because I have spent so much time researching how repetitive stress causes strain and injury to the body, and thinking about how repetitive and how physical our jobs are by nature. So all this to say, your employer has a legal obligation to create safe, sustainable working conditions. And I strongly believe that when, not if, but when you are injured at work, Your employer's obligation is to listen to what's creating and causing your body injury and to do all that they can to help create safer, more sustainable working conditions. As a dancer, I've dealt with many injuries, some permanent without surgery, and I'm extremely passionate about employers respecting our humanity by acknowledging we're humans and not machines. Your body is not company property. Let's get into it. Our bodies are being treated as company property, as interchangeable, as machines, essentially. But we're not. We're singular, unique humans. And it's not only a management problem and a management mindset. It's also a problem of what we have learned as theatrical workers that we need to unlearn to make sure that we're treating ourselves and valuing ourselves as important and expecting our employers to as well. And that our very tools, our bodies, our voices, that's what we use to do our work, that our very tools are being resourced and protected by our employers. When someone is hiring you to do a job and the tool that you are using to do that job is your body and or your voice, that tool needs to be cared for appropriately and resourced by the person requiring you to do the work. If we don't expect our employers to protect the very tools that we use to do our jobs, our voices, our bodies, and to take care of them and resource them appropriately, they're not going to do so. So we have to look at this both from the management mindset and reflect upon the things that we need to start talking about, start thinking about differently. First, I'm going to address the management mindset. To my understanding and to conversations that I have been a part of in trying to advocate for better care for people's bodies and voices in our industry. So the first thing I want to talk about here is that I've heard comparisons that are really not appropriate comparisons to make between the theater industry and other athletic jobs, industries like the NBA, Major League Baseball. I've heard theater and Broadway explicitly compared directly to the NBA and the MLB. And these are not appropriate comparisons because the structure of these industries are vastly different. To start with, major sports leagues like the NBA, like Major League Baseball, they have multiple month off seasons where athletes are not being expected to perform and execute at the same capacity at which they're expected to be able to do during their season. Sometimes in the theater industry, we're working year round. So we don't have an off season in the same way that athletes performing at the highest capacity that they're able to have multiple months to rest, to recover, to train, to condition, to be able to show up at 100% capacity or as close to as they can possibly get for their next season. We're working year round, sometimes with 1 day off a week, 52 weeks out of the year. And so when wear and tear is gradually adding up and accumulating within your body by repetitive strain from doing the same physical thing over and over again, we don't have the off time that we need to have to rest and to recover our bodies, to restore them to being totally healthy so that we can show up at 100% capacity. We're constantly working at a depleted capacity that just keeps going down and down and down when we're not resourced with the tools that we need, with the time that we need to be able to rest and to recover. When these industries are also compared, these major sports industries and the theater industry, we also have to talk about the differences in resources that are given to athletes versus theatrical workers. Athletes within the NBA, within Major League Baseball, within these other huge sports leagues have vast amount of resources available to them. And the quality and the quantity of the resources are significantly different than what we get as theater workers. Oftentimes, these athletes are also making significantly higher income, which allows them to be able to pay for additional resources. For example, like addressing nutrition, addressing having a personal trainer, having all these resources like acupuncture, like cryotherapy, like massage therapy, like physical therapy, like all these types of resources that allow them to make sure they are taking care of their body, their tool, appropriately so that they can do their job. We don't have anywhere near the same level, the same tier of resources accessible to us as theater workers. Not only because our income is significantly different, but also because the tools and resources provided by our employers are nowhere near those provided to athletes within the NBA, within the MLB, within the highest tier of their field. So we cannot directly compare these industries, athletes within these industries, to us as theater workers within our industry, anywhere within our theater industry, because the resources are nowhere near comparable and the structure of the work is significantly different. Talking about putting these things side by side, I unfortunately have to talk about absences. I have heard employers look at absences within huge players within the NBA and MLB and compare that to absences within the theater industry and how often people are calling out of work. And we cannot talk about absences without looking at what contributes to people not going to work. And there's so many different things that are lumped into that one thing, into a singular absence. There's so many different reasons that someone can call out of work. So we cannot just look at it as a number and saying these people are calling out significantly more in the theater industry than people do within the NBA or that players do within Major League Baseball. They miss fewer games than performances that people miss in the theater industry. We have to look at absences from a larger lens. We have to zoom out and talk about everything that contributes to absences. Because it's not just people don't want to come to work anymore. And that is unfortunately something that I have heard our employers say. There will always be outliers. There will always be people who just don't want to come to work. But they are very few and far between. And I do not believe that absences are indicative of just a general understanding that, quote, people don't want to come to work anymore, end quote. And it's certainly not something that should be discussed as if it's a generational issue, which I have also heard our employers say. That is ageism. And I'm not doing that because, again, we respect people's humanity. If we want to talk about absences, we have to look at it on a larger scale. We have to talk about culture. I want to challenge us to pause for a minute. Think about an environment, a work environment, where you would feel like you are excited to show up at work every day, where you are proud of the work you do. What does that look like? What does that feel like? To me, it means I'm doing work that I feel has value, that I feel proud of. I'm doing work of significance. And if you haven't read Song of Significance by Seth Godin, I'm currently working my way through it right now. It talks to this specifically. It's a fantastic reference. Everyone should read it. I'm going to continue to read it. But I'm doing work that feels significant. That makes me want to come to work. It's also crucial to me that I feel respected in my workplace. And respect is not just a vague concept. It is shown through actions and policies. So if I'm in a work environment where I don't feel respected or I don't feel safe, I don't want to go to work because almost to the extent that we feel unsafe, that's a survival instinct. There's no way we are able to show up as like whole humans when we don't feel safe. And it's unreasonable of employers to expect for employees to show up at their 100% capacity, being excited about being at work as much as you possibly can be, except when you're not injured and when you're not ill. When people who are doing the work are not being treated as valuable, are not being treated with respect, and how the workplace creates an environment for them to do their jobs in a way that they are respected and valued. Why should it's just unreasonable to expect someone to feel excited about being in an environment where they are not respected, where they are not safe. So when we talk about absences, we have to address the culture issue. These workspaces are not ones where workers are being respected, are being recognized for their humanity, are being protected, are being given a safe workspace. That's why I created this podcast. There are so many different ways that can improve. And I'm not addressing every workspace when I'm saying this, but I do believe every workspace could stand to improve somewhat, and how people are being treated, how people are being protected and made safe and valued for their humanity in their workspaces. Also, when we talk about absences, I've heard management compare absences pre-pandemic to post-reopening. And when I say post-reopening, I'm talking about post the theater industry reopening after the global COVID pandemic. And I'm not going to say post-pandemic because we are still dealing with COVID. And I think that negates the fact that many people are still at risk because of the illnesses that are going around, especially those who are immunocompromised. And we still don't know the effects of long COVID. There are so many things to still learn about COVID. So I'm not going to say post-pandemic because we are not post-COVID. I'm going to say pre-pandemic and post-reopening. So I've heard management compare absences pre-pandemic to post-reopening as if they're directly comparable, and they are not. And here's why. I don't know about you, but I'm speaking for myself. During the pandemic, during the beginning of the pandemic and our industry shutting down entirely as performers and the live entertainment industry totally shutting down, hopefully we spent time to reflect and learn how to care for other people better and also to care for ourselves better. I think in that period of reflection, we learned to expect that we are recognized for our humanity, that we are treated as humane, as humans, and that we treat other people as such. Now, unfortunately, I don't feel we see everyone treating people the same with such respect and care, but I think if you're here listening, it's because you do value treating people with care and respect. So I think we also learn to treat ourselves better, to expect that people acknowledge our humanity and give us basic human things like safety, like respect. And so that also involves taking care of our bodies and voices differently as performers. So as an example, pre-pandemic, I was on the road with Wicked. I was in Madison, Wisconsin. And the day before our show closed, which I didn't know was going to happen, we had 2 shows. And throughout the day, I gradually started having pain in my left hip. It was increasing throughout the day. I still did both the shows, but it continued to get worse. Wasn't totally terrible, but it was feeling pretty uncomfortable. And when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't put weight on my left leg at all. I could not bear weight on my leg. And Alicia, back in 2020, you know what she did? I don't know why I'm saying she. I texted my stage manager and I said, "Hi, just wanted to let you know I can't put weight on my left leg. I'm going to go to the doctor, but I'm pretty positive I'll be fine by showtime." What? Alicia in 2025, it's like, what was she thinking? If you can't put weight on your leg at all, there is no way you're doing a heavy dance show by 7 p.m. that night. But that's what I thought I could do because I was so used to pushing through injuries, pushing through illnesses. And you know what we're doing when we're doing that? We're putting people around us at risk. If I'm showing up at work sick, I'm putting the people around me at risk of being sick. And in my opinion, that is not respect. That is not care. That's in fact disrespect. And you know what I'm doing when I'm injured? If I can't do my job to the extent that I need to do it safely, if I'm dancing with people on stage or even dancing around people, if I can't travel to where I need to get, I'm putting someone else in danger because all of a sudden there's a person in their way when there's not a person there. Or if I'm partnering with someone and I can't do what I need to do to get into my lift, I'm putting my partner at greater risk of getting hurt because they have to do more to lift me. And that's also not okay. That's not care. And so during the shutdown, we reflected about these things, and myself, and I hope others, also learned to expect better of each other and to expect people to expect better of ourselves. So you know what I do now when I am injured and I know that my body is hurt? I stop. I give it the rest that it needs. I give it the time that it needs to heal because that is what we should be doing. We should not be showing up at work when we're sick. We should not be being expected by employers to do our jobs when we're sick and or injured because that's not okay. Recognizing employees' humanity means understanding when they take the rest that they need for illness and or injury. For wellness in general, and that includes mental wellness, which is a whole nother conversation that needs to be handled as a whole separate conversation because it's such a huge topic. But it is wholly inappropriate to look at the number of absences pre-pandemic, pre-shutdown, to post-reopening and say there are more absences now in our industry post-reopening than there were prior to the industry shutting down. Great. There should be because people are expecting better. People are caring for their bodies and voices. And it is absolutely wonderful that people are doing such. When we talk about how management treats employees, we have to also talk about how management resources people and how right now people are not being resourced appropriately. So physical therapy only made it into the Actors Equity Association collective bargaining agreement for the production contract in 2015. And it is not even in all of Equity's contracts today. Right now, only in the production contract, I'm going to talk about that explicitly because that is my grasp on beginning to understand all things about our union. 4 production elements in a show, in writing, qualify a show for having to provide PT to the people working the show, who are equity people. And that is extensive choreography, extensive stage fighting, aerial stunts, or a raked stage. And a raked stage means that the stage is on a diagonal. It's not a flat surface. They used to be very common back in time. That's why we have stage directions, fun fact. So if the stage was on an angle, downstage was at the front of the stage, which was at the bottom of the hill of the raked stage, and upstage is the back of the stage because it was the highest point. It was up on the stage. So we have downstage and upstage. That's a raked stage. Those 4 things qualify a production for PT care for anyone doing that type of work or working with that element in that show who's on an Actors Equity Association contract. But I want to insert a little asterisk here. Remember, any repetitive movement can lead to repetitive strain injury. It's not how difficult the movement is. It's the fact that you're doing physical movement repetitively over and over the exact same way. Trying to fight for better physical therapy care within the Actors Equity Association production contract negotiations with the Broadway League this fall was frustrating to me because our employers insist that they value our safety while also pushing hard against agreeing to the requests that we were putting forward in asking for better PT care and more expansive PT care for people working shows, both actors and stage managers. In my opinion, true listening means changing your actions. If you are responsible for creating a work environment that is causing people harm, and the people who are doing the work, the workers, are telling you that the job demands are leading to injury, are causing harm, and putting forward solutions as to what could help them better do their jobs in a safer, more sustainable way. If you truly value your workers' safety, that means you will listen when those solutions are put forward and do what you can to implement them in ways that actually create change in the workspace. Physical therapy and the care that's being provided can look different than what it currently does. Here's another example. To go through this example, I'm going to talk about my time with Wicked on Broadway and my time with Radio City as a Rockette. I am no longer a Rockette. I am no longer with Wicked on Broadway. I chose to leave a few months ago to have time and energy to pursue other types of things that I want to do, including being an associate and also dedicating more time to this podcast and advocating for better, more humane theatrical spaces. So, when I began at Wicked on Broadway, we had PT care because our show provided PT, which is great. They were actually contractually required to because the show on Broadway is done on a raked stage. And we, as company members, had access to 1 physical therapy slot per week. That means you can sign up for 1 slot that's 20 minutes long. Now, there's around 36 people. I don't think that number is totally correct. On stage alone. We also have 4 stage managers with our show. We also have, I think it takes over 125 people backstage to run the show from start to finish. And in my opinion, everyone is doing repetitive labor and should have access to physical therapy because of such a fact. But 36 in the acting company or so, flexibly so, around there. And that doesn't, I think, necessarily include vacation swings and other swings who are also a part of the company. Now, we did not have 36 slots a week, 36 plus to address the over 100 people it takes to run a show. I can't remember how many we had, but it was less than 20, I believe. Less than 20 slots a week, 20 minutes in length. And you could sign up for one. Well, you do the math. There's more people than that. So it is rare that you were getting a PT slot every week. And people were not allowed to sign up for more than 1 slot a week. So if you're lucky, you have 20 minutes of PT care a week. Now, when you're doing physical therapy and you're doing the same show over and over again, and you're working with a physical therapist, it's important that physical therapist understands your show and understands the work that you're doing and your body and your previous injuries and what different production elements you're dealing with that put you at higher risk of injury, like moving set pieces, like lifting humans or being lifted, like working on a steel or deck or a stage that doesn't have a resiliency that's appropriate for dancing. All these things put people at higher risk of injury. And when you're working with someone in a slot that's 20 minutes long, it's important that they understand you. They understand your show. Because if not, and this is what was happening, for example, when I joined Wicked, we found out in hindsight that we were working with 20 different physical therapists in rotation. 20. Usually a show has ideally 2 to 3 max working with the show in rotation. We had 20. So it was extremely rare that I would ever see the same person more than once for physical therapy care, which means in my 20-minute session, I'm spending the first, usually they run over to 2 to 3 minutes, which in my opinion is not fair when you have a 20-minute time slot. And then I'm spending the next 5 minutes or so explaining to the physical therapist my show, my track and its demands, what's causing me pain, what issue I'm dealing with, any previous injuries I have that contribute to what's going on in my body. And now my session is basically half over. And the physical therapist has about 10 minutes to provide care. That is not successful physical therapy care. That's not appropriate care. It's not effectively helping people do their show well or safely or sustainably. And this system doesn't set PTs up for success either. It's not fair to them. I know so many wonderful, fantastic PTs who all want to provide and are providing better care than that. But when the system doesn't set them up for success, that's also unfair to physical therapists. And PT care can look different than that. And for evidence, I'm going to compare my experience with Wicked with my experience as a Rockette. So at Radio City as a Rockette, you have access to athletic training team and its care providers throughout the entire season. Preseason, they do individual consultations and evaluations of everyone. So you know specifically for your body what you need to do to set yourself up for success throughout the season. They might be like, your hamstrings are super weak. Here's an exercise you can do to improve hamstring strength. Oh, your spine curves this way. You should make sure you're strengthening your core. Like, they talk about everything. The same care team sees you through the entire season. You have access to athletic training and the space and all the tools that are provided through the athletic training team before your shows every day and after your shows every day, and even in between shows. And during shows, in case of emergency, the athletic training team could come downstairs and be backstage and really quickly see to someone's injury and make sure you're okay to keep going. You have the same people seeing through your entire season. They know what injuries you're dealing with. They know how the season's been going for you so far and what type of pain you're dealing with. And that job is so difficult. It's so difficult. You do basically over, I think, 600 kicks on a 4-show day, for example. You can do up to 4 show days as a Rockette, 4 shows a day, and anyone doing the Radio City Christmas show. It is so demanding. And sometimes, because the show is 90 minutes and it's shorter and it's only for a season, so again, not directly comparable, but I do feel like it's a good comparison based on the type of work being done. Within the heaviest part of the season, you can do up to 16 shows in 1 week. So it is the most physically difficult job I have ever done. I never had one single injury in my 3 years as a Radio City Rockette pull me from one singular performance. And I dealt with injuries and pain. Not one pulled me from a show. In my 3 years at Wicked, so the same amount of time, 3 years, 3 seasons, I had multiple workers' comp injuries and claims. I had to file multiple accident reports. And I have 3 permanent injuries, all which if I want to be fully, quote, healed, I have to have surgery for. And I think I had maybe 8 medical leaves that I had to take for workers' comp injuries in my 3 years there. This is all directly a result of the different type of care being provided. The care being provided at Radio City was significantly better. And so this is just one example of what injury prevention and maintenance can look like with appropriate, thorough care and what it looks like when the care is insufficient. And care shouldn't be something that people have to ask about after they're injured. It should be something provided in advance. Physical therapy care is not only to help people rehabilitate their injuries and return to a show post-injury. It is also preventative. And it's significantly more effective when it's done preventatively. When we can anticipate people's needs, and we can do that when we listen to the people doing the work. When they say, I need this care and I'm doing this thing over and over every show, I can tell my body's already starting to hurt. They should have access to the resources that they need to make sure that they're preventatively setting themselves up for success in dealing with the elements they're dealing with, doing their show every day. And physical therapy should not only be for actors, it is also for stage managers. It should be for everyone, on stage and backstage, and in front of the stage, doing repetitive work every day. Our dressers are lifting huge, heavy costumes repetitively, using the same muscles over and over again, climbing flights of stairs, lifting heavy baskets of costumes, constantly doing the same movement with their arms. Like, all these things expose people to greater risk of injury, and they should be cared for by their employers, who are creating the conditions where people are doing work that's causing harm to their bodies. But addressing care for our bodies and voices is not only looking at it from a management mindset. We also have to look at the things we've learned as actors and stage managers that we need to unlearn. Has anyone ever heard growing up in like theater school, there's 100 people out there waiting to take your job. There's 100 people waiting in the wings who want to do what you're doing. Yes, we should be grateful being able to do work that we love. And this tactic has got to go. Management has long relied on this narrative for us to work against even ourselves and not expecting them to create safe and sustainable working conditions. If we're too busy fearing that our employer is going to find someone else to replace us, we're not focusing on expecting our employer to create better conditions that don't break our bodies and voices. You're not replaceable. You're unique. You're also a human and not a robot or a machine. And when the work is breaking your body, it's not you. It's the work. And it would break anyone's body just as easily. So let's not get stuck thinking that we're the issue. It's the work. It's the not being provided with the resources we deserve to help us care for our human bodies while doing extremely physical, extremely repetitive work on extremely excessive schedules with only one day off. It's the work. And the employer who is responsible for the conditions of the work should be responsible for resourcing the employees with the tools that we need. We also have to address the reality that a lot of us feel guilt for calling out. And that doesn't mean we should. I still have to talk myself off a ledge every time I've had to call out. And that hasn't been a few times. Like I said, I dealt with, I think, 8 medical leaves during my time with Wicked on Broadway for injuries sustained from doing my job. You know, I shouldn't feel any sense of guilt or shame for having to call out of work because my body is hurting from doing my job. That is a very appropriate response when I am injured or hurt from doing my job. It is responsible of me to care for my body, to let it heal, to give it the time that it needs to recover, because otherwise I'm putting myself at risk. I'm putting people around me at risk. We should celebrate when people care for their health and safety, and we have to stop glamorizing. And I don't think we're doing this intentionally, but we are doing it with our language, and language is powerful. We have to stop glamorizing when we've never had to call out, or when we make it through every show of an excessive holiday schedule or any other type of excessive schedule. We have to stop celebrating those things. It is great that your body held up, but like I said, language is powerful, and language like this unintentionally equivocates dedication to your job with being physically healthy and uninjured. They are not the same. We, the workers, should not act as if they are the same, because that unintentionally pairs being injured and or sick with showing a lack of dedication to your job. And that's not true. And guess what? Our employers like this, because that is in fact the very thread that they're pulling on to weaponize people calling out of work against us. This false pairing allows our employers to continue to under-resource us, and it allows unsafe and unsustainable working conditions to stay that way. We have to stop doing it. And again, I really, really want you to hear that when I'm saying this, I don't think we're doing this intentionally. I think that we are genuinely relieved when we make it through every show of a holiday schedule, and we feel excited for the fact that we did everyone and proud of that accomplishment. But when we talk about it as if it's like, yeah, I did it, and we do that publicly, it allows our employers to go, look, they can do it. And it continues to put this unspoken like guilt and shame on having to call out, on someone whose body maybe was not able to make it through that excessive schedule that they shouldn't be having to be doing in the first place. And it's not our fault. Like, we grew up with perfect attendance awards in school. That is not something we should ever give a reward for, because there is no way someone was not sick every single day of the school year. That means that child was going to school sick. And I know that everyone's situation is different, and maybe a family is not able to keep a child home from school when they are sick. So I'm not at all saying that. But we grew up with that, and I feel like the public school system anyways was created to create compliant industrial workers. Again, I'm not going to go deep into this, but Seth Godin has discussed this on his podcast, in his work. Like, I think public school system was devised during the Industrial Revolution. It's for complicity. It's for workers, to create workers who will do what is asked of them without speaking up. So perfect attendance is not something to be celebrated, because whether or not we intend it, it puts this shame on not being able to be there all the time, on having to call out whether you're sick, whether you're injured, and that's not okay. We, the workers, can't be doing that because our employers rely on us doing that. Because then we're not looking at the system itself. We're not expecting the conditions to change. We're looking at each other and whether or not we can make it through, and feeling like we should be able to make it through, when really we should be expecting our employers to treat us with humanity in how they schedule us and how they set up our workspaces and work conditions. Our jobs are hurting us, and we're not being resourced appropriately. And I really just want us to walk away from this knowing that you can and should expect your employer to listen when something's hurting you and you tell them so. This doesn't make you needy. This doesn't make you high maintenance. And it certainly doesn't make you difficult to work with, which I feel like is a label that we all fear within our industry. But that label has been used by management to villainize advocacy. Let's not perpetuate that. Let's just disregard that entirely. To be honest, management who is okay with these working conditions is always going to think that way. That doesn't mean we should allow them to label us as such. And once we all start expecting better from our employers, once we all start speaking up and saying, hey, this is hurting me and you, my employer, should change it, then that will become more normalized and conditions will have to improve because we will all be expecting better. It won't be a person, few and far between, who's saying, hey, this is not okay. It will be all of us. You are a human with one body, and you deserve to be safe and healthy. Expecting so is not an inconvenience or a burden. And taking care of yourself, calling out when you need to because something is hurting your body or your voice is something to be proud of, not something to be ashamed of. So now, what do we do? I'm going to talk about some examples of better systems or better policies that better take care of people's bodies and voices when you're doing theatrical work and doing a show over and over, 8 times a week, day after day. We can have better systems of modifying choreography for injury temporarily. I'm not expecting something to change entirely, but within reason, if something's causing injury to someone and they're in a space where they are not out of the show anymore, but they're able to do their show, we should be creating conditions where they can safely work back into the show. So this, for example, are things like working with a PT to devise modifications to the movement that allow you to do it in a way that aggravates an injury less. Working with dance captains, partners who you dance with on stage, and with support and approval from stage managers and the creative team, choreographers and associates. Working with everyone and having approval for these things is important, and these people should support you making modifications when necessary and for a reasonable amount of time to be able to work back into a show safely, to allow an injury or something that's causing you pain to heal, to get you back to 100% capacity so you're able to do the original choreography safely. And I just want to insert a little asterisk here. Creative teams. I'm an associate choreographer myself. We should be wanting to build sustainable shows, and we should be treating people as if they're unique and they're valuable. We don't want to treat people as interchangeable. So if you're building work that's unsustainable, that you look at and you know is going to break someone's body if they're doing it 8 times a week year round, I'm pretty positive there's a different movement there that can still evoke what you're wanting it to. It can still be a part of telling the story. It can still do what you're wanting it to do, but in a way that is more respectful of people's very human bodies. Let's keep that in mind when we're building shows. I think that shows respect and humanity for the people doing the shows 8 times a week. Sometimes adjusting things also involves changing tracking. And I think that these are adjustments that we can reasonably make. But also, if someone who is not the person who's needing the modification is having to adjust their tracking for someone else's modification, I think that's reasonable to expect. And in that case, they are a swing. And I think these things can be done in better ways. I've experienced this, but I've experienced this in a way where I haven't been asked if I'm okay with my tracking changing, and where I don't feel we had appropriate rehearsals for me to feel as safe as possible in the adjusted movement. We didn't rehearse it with everyone on stage, all of these things. So we can make sure that we're doing these things mindfully. And if someone whose tracking is needing to change is not the person who's needing the modification, I don't quite understand how emergency swing works within our contract, but if I'm changing my tracking, I'm not doing my track anymore. I'm now swinging. And even though I'm swinging one part of one number, I should be getting emergency swing pay for that number. But these are adjustments that we should be willing to make as a creative team, as people involved within a show, to make sure people can do it safely and sustainably. Also, if you're working with a doctor, I've had a doctor allow me to gradually return to a show for my injury because it needed that. So I couldn't jump back into 8 shows a week. And realistically, I don't think that it's safe to expect people to be able to return to 8 shows a week when you're doing 0 shows a week, if you're on a medical leave or you're on leave for an injury or illness. That's such a abrupt switch in cardio for your body, in endurance for your muscles to jump right into 8 shows a week. So doctors can and are doing this, and companies, company management, producers should allow people to gradually return to a show with support from stage management and company management and creatives. And this also means that the building has to have appropriate staffing for swings. But these are things we should be doing to support safety and sustainability. We could have better contract protections and policies in theaters for stunts, for people doing anything that involves intimacy, etc. We should be talking about consent way more than we're doing it. We should have intimacy coordinators or people in those positions to oversee that type of work. And let me say, as a dancer, intimacy and consent is not something that I have experienced much in my career as a dancer. And you do a lot of physical work with other people. This is something that should be used so much more in dancing, in theater in general. And again, it's not something we should have to beg our employers for. If you value safety in your workspace, this is something you should implement. And there are way more qualified people to talk about this, and I'm hoping to talk to someone about this in future. So if you are an intimacy coordinator or educator, please feel free to reach out. I would love to chat with you. And a better system is having better and more substantial PT that involves quality of care and quantity of care. And here I'm going to say, talk to your union if you're in a union. This cycle in the production contract negotiations with Actors Equity Association, we did get new language from bargaining. We didn't get everything we wanted. And again, we should not have to beg our employers for these things, because when you're dealing with physically repetitive work, which every single person in the theater industry is, especially actors and stage managers and crew backstage and wardrobe and hair and makeup and wigs, you should be entitled to PT care so you can do your job safely and sustainably. But we did get new language this cycle. We got language that allows our union, the union that represents actors and stage managers, to go in sooner if a production does not technically qualify for PT care from the 4 elements I talked about earlier. It allows our union to go to the producer of the show and say, hey, these people should have PT care. And here's why. And there were extensive conversations had in bargaining about physical therapy care and what should qualify for care. So our union should effectively be able to make those arguments. Talk to your union. And also, if you're having issues with the PT care being provided to your show, whether that's not enough slots, whether that's you're working with too many PTs in rotation so you don't have effective continuation of care, whether that's having a PT who's maybe not the best fit for your show or your company, and that's okay, not everyone's a fit for everyone, whether that's slots that are at inconvenient times or a location of PT care that's very inconvenient for your show, whether that's the slots should be longer, whether that's there's not enough slots for everyone to sign up for, and maybe you need more than 1 slot a week, but your company policy is only 1. Anything that addresses appropriate PT care, if it's not meeting your needs for your show, for you to do your show safely and sustainably 8 times a week, or however many times you have to do it, talk to your union, because we got language where the producers and representatives of the producers, I believe, are required to meet with our union and our head of member safety and our member safety team, who I worked very closely with. And they are phenomenal people who care so deeply about people's well-being and safety doing their shows. This language requires them to meet twice a year for every production to discuss the physical therapy care that's being provided. So any issues you're having, please talk to Equity, talk to the Department of Member Safety, and talk to your business rep. And you can find those contacts on the member portal, and feel free to message me if you don't know how to find it and you want to find it, but you need to be talking to your union because they can only fight for what they know about. If they don't know something needs to be fought for, they can't fight for it. Talk to them. And also, I'm going to talk about actions you can take as an individual instead of better systems as a whole, because we all have power. Something that you can do is organize. And I know that that's a scary idea, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how we did that at Wicked. Myself and 2 others at Wicked led an internal movement where we organized to ask our producers and general managers for better, more thorough PT care. And we also asked for a health and wellness stipend. So those of you who don't know what that is, a health and wellness stipend is a stipend. It's typically done, I think, through receipt reimbursement, where you are able to put expenses towards things that are for your physical care. And in my opinion, should also be for your mental wellness as well, because that is also wellness. And those expenses are paid for or reimbursed by your employer. So at Wicked, we did not have a health and wellness stipend. Our show opened in 2003. That wasn't a thing at the time, but many shows across the industry, especially many large chorus shows, provide them. Many very physical shows with lots of dancing provide them. And it was something that we felt would help us better care for our voices and bodies. We also, like I said, we're working with 20 PTs in rotation, and that was wholly ineffective. And we also didn't have enough slots. So we internally organized. We put together a whole presentation. We talked to people across the industry to see what they got at their show in terms of a health and wellness stipend, and also what PT access they had. And with that, we put together a whole pitch, and we met with our general managers who were kind enough to sit down with us and have a conversation and hear the presentation that we had to make about what we needed and why it would benefit not only us and our bodies and voices, but their show. It was scary. Organizing is always scary. And it was successful. We gathered signatures within the company. I think I went... myself and the other 2 people who were helping lead this went around to the entire company and gathered signatures saying, we all stand behind this ask. Please help take care of us and our voices and bodies. And it was effective. And I was also able to talk to people in another production in our industry and kind of consult with them on what we'd done internally at Wicked to help them build their own pitch and their own presentation for a health and wellness stipend in their building. And I think they also got that. So this is why I say organizing, power in numbers, it works. And if you ask, just a little note here as well, if you ask for these things individually, this is actually collective bargaining, and you do it internally at your building and it doesn't happen, or your general manager or your producers say no, write that down. Even if they say yes, write it down. Tell our union about it. Because every type of data that we can collect on this saying, hey, the workers asked for what they needed and you said no, gives us fuel at the bargaining table to make the fights that we need to fight for better care for workers. Also, let's talk about this more. The more we talk about this, the more we all start asking to be resourced appropriately in our workspaces, the better off we will be, and the less our employers will be able to get away with continuing to create unsustainable shows and working conditions, and also weaponizing legitimate absences for our wellness against us. We have to talk about this. We have to expect more. And again, if we're building shows, let's build sustainable shows and do all that we can to advocate for performers and stage managers who will be making this work happen. Empower actors to say, I can't do that. Again, I'm an associate. If someone says to me, hey, this hurts my body, I can't do that. Can I do it on this side? Or, hey, can I maybe do something like this instead? I want to work with that person to make accommodations that will allow them to be successful in doing their show safely and sustainably. That's respecting each other's humanity. That's respecting the workers. And we all very much deserve to be safe and respected in our workspaces. By caring for the workers and appropriately resourcing us in our very human bodies and voices, the producers, employers create not only stronger, safer, healthier workers, but also an environment where the workers, we, the actors and stage managers, feel valued and appreciated. Reducing injuries by resourcing people appropriately and consequentially showing employees that we're valued will lead to less absences if we're thinking that small. But hopefully we're thinking larger about respecting people's humanity, and it will contribute to people doing work that they feel matters. The quality of shows will improve, and they'll be more sustainable so that when they run longer, people will continue to stay safer and healthier. People won't feel disposable, interchangeable, threatened by the idea that there's 100 other people waiting in the wings. They'll feel unique, important, and essential to telling the story that happens on stage every night. Because we are unique and important. And we'll also feel valued, both on stage and off, by our employers and our creatives. We deserve to be recognized and appreciated for our humanity, not handled as if it's an inconvenience. We deserve to be resourced appropriately because our bodies are not company property. They are ours and ours alone. And when the work is breaking our bodies and voices, it is our employer's responsibility to resource us and to change the working conditions within a reasonable manner so that we can do our jobs safely and sustainably. That is respecting people's humanity in the theater industry. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming back to Assembly Guide and being here today. I know it was a big topic. It's one that I'm super passionate about. Check out Assembly Guide on Instagram, follow or subscribe to the podcast for upcoming episodes. And if you're enjoying the show, it would really mean the world to me if you could rate the podcast and leave a review. It's a tiny little step that helps other people find the podcast and allows more people to become a part of our community in building better, more humane theatrical spaces. And if you want to connect, or you have someone you think I should reach out to interview or connect with, you can reach out to me directly at assemblyguidepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for being here and joining me on this journey towards making change. See you soon. Bye.